Now we're going to take a look at the hormones involved in a menstrual cycle, as we found that many women do not understand fully the hormones that are linked to the menstrual cycle. And that's really important to fully understand that before we delve into the perimenopause or the postmenopause. But before we start, we'd love to know, what do you call your period or your menstrual cycle? Please come into the community and let's start the conversation about periods. It was very much a taboo in my house as a teenager growing up. It was something we didn't discuss. And from conversations now later on with my mother, it was in their generation, it was known, it was quite a dirty thing, as a dirty topic that you didn't discuss. So I'd love to know, what do you call your period, your menstrual cycle? We've heard some very unusual ones, Rachel and I, when we've been doing corporate training. So we've heard Aunt Flo, time of the month is common, and being on the blob, Little Red Riding Hood. We'd just love to know. And we've heard some unusual ones, depending on what side of the pond you're on. So the USA tend to have some different ones to the UK. But we're going to delve now into hormones. So let's have a good look into the hormones involved in your menstrual cycle. So a typical menstrual cycle should last 28 days. That's prior to perimenopause, so the pre-menopause, the fertile years. And it's closely aligned with the moon cycle. Many believe that a woman's body is naturally in sync with the moon, meaning you might bleed or ovulate around the time of the new moon or the full moon. And this alignment is considered to be ideal for hormonal balance. Now, your cycle is regulated by various hormones that fluctuate throughout the month. And you will see from the graph on this slide, at the top, you will see the cycle from ovulation, where you can see the egg developing. And then we've got body temperature, and you'll see how the body temperature rises around ovulation and then how it decreases with certain types of hormones. Now, this is important later on when you get to the late stages or early or late stages of perimenopause. When the progesterone drops off, you may notice that you become colder in temperature. We've also got the hormones, the luteinizing hormone and the follicular stimulating hormone. You can see the lines with estrogen, progesterone, and at the bottom, that's your uterus lining, showing how it builds up and breaks down. So looking at the luteinizing hormone and the follicular stimulating hormone, so that is the blue and the green lines. These hormones are responsible for your period cycle and egg release. They rise during the middle of the cycle, triggering ovulation, and the luteinizing hormone helps to mature the follicle, releasing the egg, while follicular stimulating hormone stimulates the ovaries to produce the eggs. Now you'll see estrogen or estrogen. This hormone increases during the first half of your cycle, helping the uterus lining to thicken in preparation for a possible pregnancy. And a peak in the estrogen before ovulation is essential for triggering that luteinizing hormone and the ovulation. So you will see on the graph how the yellow line, the estradiol or estrogen, spikes and then drops off. Now, progesterone. After ovulation, progesterone levels rise to support a potential pregnancy by maintaining the uterine lining. If pregnancy doesn't occur, then progesterone levels start to drop off, and that triggers your period cycle. Now you'll see on this graph all of those lines. So the red lines representing the temperature changes throughout the month. After ovulation, you'll notice that the temperature rises slightly due to increase in progesterone and then drops off. The blue and the green lines, which are your luteinizing and follicular stimulating hormone, that shows the fluctuations marking ovulation when they peak. The yellow line is representing estrogen, in particular estradiol, which we'll look into later in the course. And that rises in the first half of your cycle and drops off after ovulation. The purple line is showing progesterone, which increases after ovulation and drops in pregnancy. doesn't occur. And then the bottom box is, as I mentioned earlier, showing your uterus lining and how the thickness of the uterine lining builds up in preparation for a potential pregnancy and then sheds when your period cycle begins. Now, this is really important to understand when you go into the perimenopause, especially when you're thinking about doing hormone replacement therapy. And maybe you will need to take progesterone if you still have your uterus, which, unless you've had a hysterectomy, that will be the case for you. And you'll see it's because as the progesterone drops, which quite often drops first in perimenopause, that causes the uterus lining to shed. So if you're taking just estrogen medication, then your uterus lining will not be breaking down, which can cause further symptoms, and we do not want that. So it's really important to speak to your healthcare provider. Now, as you enter that perimenopause, the hormonal changes become more pronounced. And I'm going to show that in the next slide for you. So you'll see here in this graph, you'll see at the top left, you'll see the estrogen. Now, estrogen tends to decline quite slowly. You'll have a 35% reduction. This is common in women aged 35 to 50. It tends to decline quite slowly and it can fluctuate. Whereas you'll see the progesterone, which is the dotted line underneath, there is quite a rapid reduction for most women, and 75% of that can reduce from age 35 to 50. You'll almost see that it drops off a bit like the Big Dipper on a roller coaster, whereas estrogen tends to be a bit more like the ups and downs. And you can see that in the bottom where we look at 180 days of perimenopause. You'll see that the red line is your estrogen or estrogen, and the blue line is your progesterone. So as you enter the perimenopause, progesterone is usually the first hormone to drop off for most women, usually starting from 35, 38 for some women, and then more rapidly in the early 40s to mid 40s. And this sharp decline can lead to symptoms like anxiety, low mood, hot flushes, and the sleepless nights. While estrogen tends to decline more gradually, it can also fluctuate wildly during this time, contributing to further disruptions in your cycle and quite often estrogen dominant type symptoms. In the late stages of perimenopause, your periods may become irregular, shifting from a consistent 28-day cycle to longer gaps, sometimes as long as 180 days or longer between periods. And during this phase, it's the estrogen that's fluctuating, again, a bit like the ups and downs of a roller coaster, which is why so many women experience symptoms like the hot flushes, the mood swings, the weight gains. Now, after menopause, so post-menopause, whilst your ovaries stop producing the eggs, your body still makes a small amount of these hormones like estrogen, a little bit of progesterone, and at lower levels. And this is why some postmenopausal women may experience some milder symptoms. Now, remember, any symptom is a sign that your body's unhappy or going through changes, and you shouldn't put up with it. There's plenty you can do. Now, I've already mentioned the importance of tracking your period. Tracking your period cycle, please start doing it if you are not already and you're still having some periods. It's a great way to understand your hormones and spot irregularities. You can use a period tracking app, which we've mentioned previously, or simply note the start and the end date of your periods, as well as any symptoms you experience, mood swings, cramps, hot flushes, even down to the flow of your period, whether it's heavy, sometimes the color of your blood can be useful. Pay attention to the length of your cycle as well as when ovulation typically happens. You may notice ovulation, although it's less common in the perimenopause, especially the later stages. It may be that you do not ovulate every single month. Now, this ovulation tends to be around day 14 for a typical 28-day cycle, and it will be obviously come slightly before in a shorter cycle, or can be after in a longer cycle. If you notice significant changes or symptoms that are becoming harder to manage, then it might be time to talk to your healthcare provider, your GP, to discuss options, medication, for some hormone testing, although we have mentioned many doctors do not do hormone testing. The Dutch test can be useful, especially cycle mapping Dutch test for those of you that are having symptoms such as PMS, really bad PMS, or PMDD, or who are still thinking of fertility. And that offers a comprehensive view of your hormone picture overall. And by tracking your period, you can empower yourself with the information about your body and understand your hormone fluctuations and make informed choices about how you manage your health and your hormones during this time. And just in case you weren't aware, when you're tracking your period, you count day one. Day one is the first day of your menstrual bleed.